Ready for summer and want an enjoyable day trip? Head to Fauquier County, Virginia, just off I-66, nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Fauquier County has over 25 local wineries, breweries, hiking trails, and Rappahannock River access. Check out visitfauquier.com for details. Fauquier County, find what you love.
This podcast of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, is sponsored by AAA Heating and Air.
The premier HVAC company in the Midlands is growing. Are you a top HVAC technician?
AAA Heating and Air is looking for dedicated applicants to fill their fast-growing service department with top-notch HVAC technicians.
If you're the best, then they want you. If you're ready to stop working and start a career, you can earn up to $100,000 plus a year at AAA Heating and Air.
Quality candidates will have at least 2 years experience and a good driving record. Benefits include top industry salaries, commission on service and unit sales, set call limits, company-provided take-home vehicle and gas card, company-provided cell phone and tablet, health, dental, and vision benefits, 401k retirement plan with company match, and scaled PTO based on length of service.
Contact Roy and Dana Finley at 803-677-1500 or check out their job postings on Facebook or ZipRecruiter.
AAA Air when you need us. AAA Heating and Air.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, founded by firemen. With Chris Clark.
The 2007 South Carolina class was, at that time, 6th in the country and 4th in the SEC, which is amazing.
Wes Mitchell.
You know, I think if you're South Carolina, you're aiming to at least be at 50%. Then in theory, you're adding talent, you're getting better, you're putting yourself in a position to compete.
And Tyler Head.
It's been a great week for South Carolina. On the recruiting front, still certainly plenty to talk about.
On the home of the Gamecocks, 107.5 The Game.
Welcome into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, Wes, and Chris, along with you on this Tuesday morning. Hopefully everybody enjoyed their Memorial Day weekend. Just wrapping up the Garnet Trust Hour, talking with Nick Gargiulo, the offensive line transfer from Yale for the Gamecocks. Great interview, by the way. Learned a lot of things over the course of that hour. He is an aspiring golfer, still working on perfecting how to eat a chicken wing, and he is very ready for the South Carolina Heat here in a couple of weeks.
He's been warned. I don't know if he's ready. Also, we learned Chris was trying to get him in trouble, which he was on to you.
He avoided it.
Yeah, he did. He was on to you, though. And I think, you can tell the guys from Yale.
Yeah.
Very, very well spoken.
He outsmarted me trying to get him pinned down on something. He's like, nope, you're not going to get me in trouble. He had a little craftiness.
Very, very entertaining guy. Very funny. Very big.
Breaking news: transfer from Yale.
Big.
Very smart.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool guy though. I like him a lot. I could see why
guy.
he just rolled right in. He had just enough of that crazy eye look to him that I could see how when he turns it on the field, like I could see how that's a thing. And that was one of the first things we heard. We're like, man, this Gargiulo guy, a little bit out there on the field, might be, I don't know, maybe one of Carolina's best blockers this year. And just instantly came in and kind of made an impact in the spring. And these transfer guys, honestly, sometimes they come in and, you sort of maybe hear, well, it's not an easy transition. Sometimes you hear they've just slid right in and fit right in. And that was the case with Gargiulo right off the bat. Chris and I heard that both from offensive guys and from defensive guys talking about, his ability to block the defensive guys. So, but yeah, you can, very likable guy. I think he's got a future in coaching if he wants it, but maybe ends up working for some startup of his buddies. I don't know. He's got a lot of options, I'm sure.
Yeah, he almost, I don't know, the startup thing, like he almost had a little bit of a jab at the startup thing a little bit. So I don't know. He kind of reminds me of what's that phrase that Stanford used back in the day, intellectual brutality.
I don't know that phrase.
Well, now you do. That's a good Nick Gargiulo, like intellectual brutality.
What does that mean?
Basically, like we're going to outsmart you and beat you mentally and physically. That was their big motto. And then Mike Bloomgren took it from Stanford to Rice. I don't think it worked that well at Rice, but it worked well at Stanford.
How do you know all this, Chris? This is very intriguing. I think that's what I want in my center, though.
It's perfect.
Say that phrase again.
Intellectual brutality.
Yeah, I think that's what I want in my center. Now, he played a lot of guard.
Yeah.
And, I think there's some different things you could do there. He could. I still think Vershawn Lee could play guard potentially as well. Like, it seems like at least the way they were putting it during the spring, maybe if both guys are on the field, which right now it looks like they're both going to have to be, I think, that they had Lee at center, Gargiulo at guard. Lee's played some guard in his career as well, but that's what I want in my center is the guy that can combine those two things. But he seemed to really like playing inside and said it was a heck of a lot easier than playing left tackle.
Well, I believe he said left tackle was the hardest position on the offensive line, his opinion at least.
Yeah, I'm always curious to get that perspective from an actual offensive lineman because that's kind of what I'd worked out in my mind. But then you think about, like I always think about, this is dumbing it down. This is like very, very oversimplifying it. But I always think about, all right, you're a center, okay? You're snapping the football and you instantly have at least one guy trying to destroy you, right? But for him, it was about the concept of having help. If you're a center, you got help on the left, you got help on the right. Left tackle, you're on an island. But he played it well at Yale.
Yeah, and I think, I believe he said guard is the easiest.
Yes.
Because you have help on both sides and you don't have the mental aspect of making all those calls. And, so that's certainly a factor as well. But man, left tackle against some of the guys you're going to face in this league, that's tough, man. And that's honestly why I think you go into this this summer stretch, this sort of preseason stretch for South Carolina, and all of a sudden, I do find myself a little bit concerned about the offensive line when you throw in the fact that Jalen Nichols, had the big injury. So it's kind of a situation where there are some guys on this offensive line who have played a pretty good bit, even if they weren't quote-unquote starters at the end of last year. However, there's that big kind of gaping hole right there at left tackle. And we asked Shane Beamer during the Welcome Home Tour, he didn't just say, hey, Ja'Kai Moore is next man up. He said there's a bunch of guys who are going to get a look there. Haven't heard anything, even though Gargiulo did play left tackle. Haven't, to swing this back to him as the subject, haven't heard anything about him possibly getting a look there. Seems more like he's guard, he's center. But Marquis Anderson, who I think long-term is an interior guy, certainly sounds like, he could be a factor. Maybe even at left tackle, he played there some in the spring game.
Yeah, it's really interesting what Nick said, too, about the depth. Sometimes, even though he wouldn't give away the secrets I was trying to get him to give away, Wes.
He didn't give you nothing.
He didn't give me anything. But he did give us a little nugget in that he kind of admitted, he didn't give the standard like, oh, it's next man up. He admitted, like, look, you're playing offensive line. I thought it was really interesting. Playing offensive line, you're going to have some guys get hurt. Mm-hmm. Like, you just straight up just said it. And he's right. You think about the Jalen Nichols injury, but he put it in terms of you're going to have a guy roll an ankle or something and be out for 3 or 4 games. And if you think back to even just the last few years at South Carolina, that's happened, right? Dylan Wanham, unfortunately, had some injury struggles with a couple different things at South Carolina that sidelined him for a good portion of the season at times. That forced you, because he was a starter, now you're moving more things around. So, coming into the year, you felt pretty decent about what South Carolina had because, yes, they had lost 3 very experienced players on the offensive line, but they were plugging in some pieces of guys who had starting experience, who had played plenty of football. Now you've lost one of those, and so it really digs into your depth there.
Something else we learned that I guess he didn't actually say it. He didn't come out and say it explicitly, but pretty much kind of did. Sounded like his group won what I guess was it still called Grit Night this year?
Yeah, I think that was it.
Is it Grit Night every year? Is that the final?
Yes.
The final challenge.
That's what we were talking about when he said that he won.
Winter workouts.
Yeah.
But basically, that was the thing where they had guys digging things up and then having to carry the buckets full of water, I think. I thought they were buckets of concrete at first when I heard about this, but I think they were buckets of water. They had to dig them up and then carry them all around the ramps into the stadium, basically. And so he did seem like that guy that, and he even admitted this, that kind of enjoys those crazy, weird competitions. And I think is the type of person you want on your team if you were in a battle like that. But I thought it was interesting that his team, I guess you will, his group won that. Again, guy comes in from Yale. I get it. Like, some people probably like, wait, what? But I do think there are good players at that level. There's just not as many good players. And, maybe the athleticism, maybe a guy's a tick off, and, maybe a 40-yard dash is a tick slower at that level, or a guy's an inch and a half shorter than the equivalent guy at the SEC. But as we've seen for South Carolina, you can find good players at these other levels, and it certainly seems that they have done that and that he has fit right in. Even though he admitted he looked around, it's like athletically, wow, everybody here is big and fast. But he has slid right in, it seems like, as far as being a guy who fits with what you have to be at the SEC level.
There's actually an Ivy League receiver from Princeton, Andre, I'll probably botch the last name, Andre Iosivis. I definitely botched that. But he was an All-American in 2 sports as a heptathlete. He was drafted by the Bengals. He ran a 4.39. So, I mean, to your point, and Nick said this too, like, hey, we've got SEC-level guys. He said when I got here to South Carolina, you look around, everybody's an SEC guy. There's some in the Ivy League. You see Ivy League guys get drafted all the time, and I think you see this a lot. Like, remember when Nick Muse came from William & Mary, Gargiulo, even like Juice Wells. Like, we're taking a receiver from James Madison, Like, well, he's pretty good. You're not going to see all 22 be that good, but some of those guys do slip through the cracks and get down to that level. If you took a roster full of James Madison transfers or Yale transfers or William & Mary, that's the roster you're going to get. But when you can just go pick them, it's kind of like the draft. You look at the NFL draft, where are the best players? Let's go pick those players. And that's what you have to do in recruiting, whether it's high school, JUCO, or even from the transfer market.
Right. If you missed any of that conversation with Nick Gargiulo, I'll have it up on the 107.5 The Game podcasting page shortly. We'll come back on the other side. South Carolina baseball learned that they are going to be hosting a regional at the end of the week. We'll talk about that next on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. 107.5 The Game.
Y'all know what day it is. I think it's Tuesday, and I know that it is Turkey Bacon Ranch Day. That's Juice Wells' favorite day. That's Tyler's favorite day. It's my third favorite day behind a couple of others. But head on over to Firehouse Subs. You can go to firehousesubs.com. You can hit it on the app. Whatever you're most comfortable with, you can walk in there and order it. But either way, $7.99 sub of the day. There's a sub of the day every single day now at Firehouse Subs. That's for the medium. You can get the small for $5.99, but who wants to do that? Go ahead and go for the medium, $7.99 every single day. Again, firehousesubs.com, Firehouse Subs app, or if you'd rather wait in line, just go in there and tell them you want the sub of the day. Again, that's Tuesday Turkey Bacon Ranch. Shout out again, Larry Chandler, our buddy over there at Firehouse Subs. Firehouse Subs is the presenting sponsor of GC Takeover every single day of the week.
More on the NCAA Regional coming up the end of the week next on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour on 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs. Founded by firemen with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks. 107.5 The Game.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Here on 107.5 The Game, Tyler, West, and Chris along with you on this Tuesday morning. As I mentioned before the break there, After a lot of questions, South Carolina did find out that they are going to be hosting an NCAA regional coming up at the end of this week as the number 15 overall seed, going to be matched up with the Gainesville regional that Florida is hosting as well. And the three teams coming into Founders Park this week are going to be Central Connecticut State, North Carolina State, and perhaps the most dangerous one of them all, the Campbell Camels, coming in as the 2 seed, a number 14 overall ranking in the D1 baseball latest top 25. But for South Carolina, we've talked about it for several weeks. Would their resume stack up and get them a hosting seed? And at the end, that's what ended up winning out for them.
Would y'all have known they were the Campbell Fighting Camels if you didn't read it?
I knew that actually a couple years ago. They came into Athens and bounced Georgia in a regional. They're a very good baseball program.
Well, they were probably, one of the first 2 or 3 teams out as far as being a regional host. So this, to me, felt like the committee basically saying, look, South Carolina, you're obviously one of the last teams in, but we're going to give you one of the first teams out in terms of hosting and send them to your place. A lot of the projections leading up to this thing actually had South Carolina the reverse, going to Campbell as the 2 seed with Campbell hosting. So this is a team that has been really good this year. Head coach Justin Hare, I think, is very highly thought of in the college baseball community from what I've heard and read. And, this is not a one-off for them. Like, they have, quietly been a really, really good program the last few years. And I think is obviously a tough matchup for South Carolina. Now, you're gonna have to go through a pretty solid 2 most of the time, no matter who you are. But certainly, I would think one of the better 2 seeds in the country, and then NC State as the 3. I don't get the sense NC State is quite as good this year as they usually are. That's a very rock solid program, so a really good team most years. There was some talk, I think, about whether they would even get in or not. But certainly, you'd rather be the one, goes without saying, but being the 1 as opposed to being the 2, and maybe feeling like, not that you're just handed game 1, right? But the way you can set up your pitching as a 1 seed is a little bit different than if you're a 2 having to battle it out with that 3 seed just to get to that winner's bracket game. So I think certainly sets up well for South Carolina this weekend to beat Campbell.
Yeah, it kind of lets you play from a pitching standpoint, like the longer game, right? You don't feel like, okay, we've absolutely got to get this done. We got to throw the kitchen sink game 1. But yeah, when you look, it's an interesting draw. I really like your point, Wes, about kind of, okay, you guys get to host, but you're also going to get a really, really difficult team, and that's what Campbell is. Colin Taylor on Gamecock Central has a great piece up that does pretty extensive breakdown of all the teams in the regional. Campbell's RPI 13. So quad 1 wins 9-5, quad 2 wins 8-5 this season. So like you said, Wes, one of the first teams out in terms of being a regional host. And if you just look at them statistically, they can hit really well, and they're just really well-rounded. You kind of look at what do they do well. They do a lot of everything well. They can hit for average. They have some guys with power, 116 homers as a team. At least 6 guys have 10, and they like to steal bases on you. They've got some guys that can run. So I think there's another point in here in Colin's piece that he didn't make explicitly, but when you kind of look through the teams, I think it illustrates how good South Carolina's resume still was, despite their scuffle at the end of the year. Best series win for Central Connecticut State is Sacred Heart. The best series win for NC State was against Louisville, who had kind of basically a down year this year, RPI number 43. And even Campbell, who's really, really good, their best series win was against Louisiana, which is a RPI 47 team. And look at South Carolina's resume. They have a few of those very high RPI wins. I think, talking to Tommy Moody out there, 8 wins, right, against the top 8 seeds in the tournament this year.
Right. And you mentioned that skid they had at the end of the season, going 5-13 down the stretch. It all kind of goes back to that Florida series. You sweep Florida, then you have that week off for exams where you didn't play a midweek game, and everything kind of fell apart after that. And then you look to last week getting eliminated in the SEC tournament on Thursday, and now having a full 8 days off before you play this first game against Central Connecticut State on Friday night at 7 o'clock out at Founders Park in Kingston. And a couple players were talking about this yesterday. An opportunity to kind of reset, obviously get guys healthy, and just, look at this as a brand new season because, as Kingston said yesterday, it's like another opening day. And what you did up to this point, outside of getting you the hosting seat or getting in the tournament, doesn't matter. And it's a whole new ball game going forward.
Yeah, and I think, so looking through this Campbell team, Chris was throwing out some of the numbers there. I mean, if you have an OPS over 1,000 as a team, like that is a huge number. Yeah. But what stands out to me, too, is that this is a team that walks a lot. They strike out quite a bit as well. But it sounds like much like we saw South Carolina earlier in the year when they would feast on opponents who would put them on base, take walks, crowd the plate, hit by pitches. How many times did we see South Carolina have big innings where they're getting the big home run ball, but they're getting guys on base by sort of manufacturing and working counts and taking their hit by pitches? Well, this is a team that walks almost 6 times per game. So you're kind of, at times, that tells me you're feasting on pitchers who probably are nibbling a little too much and maybe aren't able to go right at you. If I'm South Carolina, I look at that and I say, look, this is a good hitting lineup, obviously, but let's just play this thing out. Let's say it's Jack Mahoney. Obviously, there's going to be some question about how you split this up if you're South Carolina. Who do you throw game 1? Who do you throw game 2? I'm going Mahoney all the way in game 2, me personally. But I think you go right at these guys and make them prove that they can hit at a similar clip against an SEC staff. And they still 2.3 bases per game as well, so they're going to try to run on you. The key to a team like this is just to go right at them and not put them in a situation where you're giving up free bases, because then they're going to hit the long ball and they're going to try to just take second from you. Obviously, another key here is that it does look good for Messina to be back this weekend. So against potentially a team that runs, that's huge to have your catcher, your leader, your main guy, your heartbeat of the team back out there. But, hey, the guys have got to get past Central Connecticut State first before they can look ahead to Campbell. And this is a program, frankly, guys, I'm not familiar with at all until I saw the name pop up on the bracket.
Do you know what their mascot is?
The Lions.
It's a Blue Devil.
Would have never come up with that.
You'll be interested to know on Friday, Colin and I are going to have a thorough discussion on which of these 4 mascots would win in a fight. So a Gamecock, Wolfpack, Camel, or a Blue Devil. So we'll be putting in our research this week for that conversation.
I look forward to that.
You should. It's going to be good.
By the way, Central Connecticut State, 0-4 in Quad 1 games. 0-0 in Quad 2 games, and 1-0 in Quad 3 games. Point being, they have played 5 games against Quad 1, 2, or 3. Everything else. So, yeah, actually a really nice record for them. Great in-conference season for them. But pretty much all of their games were what the NCAA would call Quad 4 games.
That game against them coming up Friday night at 7 o'clock, which you can listen to right here on 107.5. The game, North Carolina State and Campbell will play earlier in the afternoon at 1 o'clock, and I believe you can see that game on the SEC Network. Come back on the other side. The SEC spring meeting is getting underway today down in Destin, Florida, and the conference schedule, the hot topic, but the model that we've all been hoping for may not come to pass just yet. We'll talk about it on the other side. You're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. 107.5 The Game.
Hey, any parents out there like me, you would do anything to protect your kids, your family. That's why it's so important to protect them with life insurance from State Farm. State Farm agent Amy Mason-Cup will help make it easy and affordable to help you protect your family no matter what the future holds. Because for the people you do anything for, life insurance could mean everything. Call State Farm agent Amy Mason-Cup in the Midlands today. Her office is right off of I-26, 612 St. Andrews Road, Suite 4 in Columbia. She can give you a personalized quote on life insurance to protect your children, to protect your loved ones. And if you want to check on some other insurance products, auto, home, boaters, renters, anything you need from an insurance standpoint, Amy Mason Cup State Farm can help you out with that. She's a local agent. She's a South Carolina native. Her team's awesome. I've worked with them personally. So she and her team, again, they can give you a personalized quote to meet your needs and help you save. Again, give her a call, 803-772-5554. You can check out her website, amymasoncup.com. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Will the SEC go to a 9-game conference schedule? Not if the money's not there. We'll talk about it next on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, founded by firemen, with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks, 107.5 The Game.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris on you on this Tuesday morning. Today's the official start of the SEC spring meetings down in Destin, Florida. So we've talked about a lot over these past couple of weeks. Really, for this past year, it's been a point of conversation of what the SEC is going to do as far as the new schedule goes when Texas and Oklahoma join the conference in 2024. And while everybody seems to favor the 9-game conference schedule, the latest conversations, there's a great article up by Ross Dellinger on Sports Illustrated from yesterday, seems like the 8-game model might be put in place at least for 1 year in 2024.
Well, I kind of get why, though, right? I mean, and first of all, maybe I'm one of the few people. I feel like 9-game model is a little bit awkward. The fact that you some years play, hey, this year you play 4 home games, but you got 5 conference road games. Then next year it flips. Like, I don't know. Like, I've always thought of conference play, like within a league, being equal as far as home and road games. Like throughout sports, I feel like you don't see there being 1 game more away or 1 game more at home. So I feel like 9 games is a little bit awkward as far as like schedule strength, equity, maybe. However, on the other side of this, if I'm the SEC and I can get more money for that 9th game, then certainly you're probably going to make that move. But it sounds like at this point, ESPN is kind of balking at that idea of renegotiating this contract and changing it with this additional game. So if I'm the SEC and I'm bargaining, I'm not giving you that extra game for nothing.
Yeah, and that's what it all boils down to, is the fact that ESPN is not ponying up any more money at this point in time. The number figure I saw estimated would be in the area of about $80 million extra dollars per year, about $5 million per school for that extra game. And if, for those that don't know, ESPN is also in the midst of laying off a lot of employees right now. So wouldn't be the best optics if they just suddenly shelled out another near $100 million while cutting a lot of their employees. Do I eventually think they're going to come around to that 9th game? Likely so, especially when they see getting that first full year of the SEC package in 24 and seeing the ratings that, Texas and Oklahoma bring to the conference. I think they'll eventually come around, but this kind of seems to me like a stopgap thing in the meantime.
Well, and y'all remember our conversation, I guess that was last week or the week before, the fact that ESPN is heavily exploring going off on their own as far as a standalone streaming package. Well, it certainly feels like traditional cable, satellite, streaming services, streaming in general is still at a little bit of a crossroads as far as what's the next step. And, I certainly think live sports are still where the value is as far as those things go. And it's one of the few things that you still can force people to watch live at a particular time as opposed to being on demand. But I think if you're ESPN, things are a little bit in flux right now. You have, what would you call it, like macroeconomic things involved. Like the entire country, the economy is a little bit in flux right now. And like Tyler said, you're laying people off right now. You're kind of waiting for that shoe to drop to see where things are overall. And so it certainly, I think, makes sense to press pause on this thing right now.
Yeah, you don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul type of things because you've got, you think about $80 million, ESPN could do that, and they could, but factor in what you guys have said, but also, they're involved. Rights are expensive for all these sports. And so, yes, college football is huge, but you know what else is huge? The college football playoff and the NBA and UFC. These are big too. And so if you're in the bidding process of those, you kind of, as you said, Wes, need to see kind of where those things shake out. I don't know. Some schools have gone on record saying that they're not in favor of this. And I think it makes sense if you're the SEC or if you're some of these individual schools, or really all of them, to say, why would we go to the ninth if there's not more money? Even if you don't really care, you can use that as a negotiating tactic. If they're going to make you play an extra game, why not? And Greg Sankey, interestingly, has said today, guys, that he has an opinion on it that he has not stated yet. What do y'all think it is?
I think he leans more towards the 9-game model.
I think so, too. That's my theory, at least.
If they're going to pay.
If they're going to pay. And he's probably got some gamesmanship about it, too.
Well, here's the thing. Just from a negotiating standpoint, if I give you something and I set that up as the expectation, okay, Tyler, I'm giving you this.
Okay.
For free. And then next year I'm like, hey, man, I'm going to give you this, but now I need you to pay me. You'd be like, but no, you already set the standard. You're giving it to me.
Right.
So I feel like this is kind of standard negotiating. Mm-hmm. I'm going to make you pay for it to set that precedent now, not set the precedent that, hey, this 9th game is not valuable. So I think it makes sense on all sides, honestly. I'm still okay with 8 games, me personally.
Yeah.
And I think South Carolina should be, too, the way they have scheduled up. They play Clemson every year. This year they're playing North Carolina. You want to add in a 9th tough game in there? I think, you start looking at the way this schedule, and you do these things like 10, 12, 100 years ahead of time. I mean, didn't South Carolina schedule Virginia Tech and Miami for like 40 years from now?
Yes.
I mean, it's like
2089.
And that's another point that Sankey brought up in terms of we're, a year and a half away from the 2024 football season. South Carolina's already got 4 opponents lined up for non-conference next year: Old Dominion, Akron, Wofford, and of course Clemson. And the farther this goes along, the harder it is to remove one of those games and replace it with a conference game. So that could be another caveat for why this might get put off for another year.
Well, and you look at the model of kind of, if you keep the 8 games beyond the 2023 season or 2024, if you go long term with the 1 permanent and the 7 rotating, then you're getting into the realm of cutting out those secondary big rivalry games. And it seems a lot of programs, and probably Greg Sankey, want to keep those, right?
Right. And we'll hit this on the other side. There's an interesting note about what they would do in 24 with the schedule in regard to those games. What that next when we come back on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. 107.5 The Game.
We were so excited to be at Gold Line Framing a couple of weeks ago, and you can go over there now as well. Guys, we saw the artwork on the walls. We saw some Williams-Brice Stadium prints. We saw Williams-Brice Stadium drawings, and we saw some awesome framing jobs as well. I've been telling people for the last few weeks, if you have a graduate in your life, if you have a graduate from South Carolina, a graduate from one of the other colleges in the in the state of South Carolina, even if you have a Clemson grad, I understand, guys, that they keep these in the back, but they do have some ways for you to frame up a Clemson diploma as well. They certainly do cater a little bit more, I feel like, to Gamecock fans. But if you're a Clemson fan, you can get that too. Head on over to Gold Line Framing. My friend Kendall Walsh will take care of you. This is in West Columbia, South Carolina. Gold Line Framing, an excellent place to find a gift for that graduate in your life.
More on the SEC schedule on the other side. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5.
Ready for summer and want an enjoyable day trip? Head to Fauquier County, Virginia, just off I-66, nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Fauquier County has over 25 local wineries, breweries, hiking trails, and Rappahannock River access. Check out visitfauquier.com for details. Fauquier County, find what you love.
Game.
Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs. Founded by firemen with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks. 107.5 The Game.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you for a few more minutes before handing things over to Jay and Terry for the halftime show. We've been talking about the SEC scheduling model as the SEC spring meetings get underway down in Destin, Florida. And before we hit the break there, Chris was talking about the secondary rivalries and how the 8-game conference schedule would affect those. Obviously, with the 8-game model, you would have your one permanent opponent and then your 7 opponents that mix and match over the course of the next couple of seasons. So the Iron Bowl obviously would be preserved. Georgia, Florida would be preserved. LSU and Arkansas and Missouri, I think, would be one of the ones that get preserved, and so on and so forth. But the secondary rivalries, your Alabama, Tennessees, your Georgia, Auburns, those would eventually get to where you're not playing them every single year under an 8-game model. But Greg Sankey did say, should they go to this, at least for the 1 year, the idea would be to have those for that season, assuming maybe you go to the 9-game schedule in 2025, and then you're able to continue those on without having any breaks there.
Right, and that is one of the advantages of the 9-game, right? I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, everybody in college football wants to see Texas and Texas A&M return. Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just ridiculous that this game isn't played. I like watching Alabama, Tennessee. I like watching Auburn, Georgia. So I'm kind of conflicted because I do like those games. I also, just on a more micro level, following the South Carolina program, being that involved with it, I think if you're South Carolina, I think you vote against the 9-game schedule. Use vote as just kind of a hyperbolic term. You kind of are against it for the reasons that we stated in the last segment, right? You're already playing your conference schedule. You're playing Clemson every year, who happens to be a very, very good program. And then you're typically going to have another, this year, North Carolina, you're typically going to have another really good game. And it's cool to have all these good games if you win. There's a lot of excitement going into them, but it makes it difficult. Now, there is an opening for teams like South Carolina or some others to make a bigger play to win a championship one day with the expansion of the college football playoff. But it's just hard with the schedule like this. So I find myself a little conflicted. I want these games to be played, but I also think, just me personally, I kind of like keeping the 8-game schedule. Now, Ross Dellinger pointed out in his story expected permanence in an 8-game model for South Carolina, and this would be kind of that 1-year model would be South Carolina, Kentucky. Hey, yeah, that's a natural.
Oh, it's 2 schools that really don't have any other
place to go.
Big in-conference rivals necessarily compared to some of the other ones. The Georgia, Florida's, the Auburn, Alabama's type thing.
If you're a Gamecock fan, you're all for that, right?
All for it, yeah. Yeah.
Kentucky, yeah, of course. Play them every year.
Yeah.
I think you're very happy with that. But, by the way, Ross Dellinger, let's give him a round of applause, man. This guy
he rules.
Kills it on the SEC beat as far as knowing what's going to happen before it happens. Probably nobody better right now. But the fact is, there's a lot of everything's in flux right now, so everything's on the table, I think. But if I'm South Carolina, like I said to start, like Chris said, I'm cool with staying with 8, especially these other teams don't all have. But basically, their top rivals are all already in conference, so you're looking at protecting those, yes. But if you add an additional game, that's really not the same as it is for South Carolina when you have an SEC quality program out of conference. In Clemson, Georgia gets to play Georgia Tech in that slot. So, I think it is a little bit different for the Gamecocks, and I think you're cool with 8 right now. You're cool with Kentucky. And ultimately, does it matter that you're going to have to, when you go to 9, you're going to have to cancel games more than likely that have already been scheduled out. So what is the financial impact of potentially having to pull out of games? Like, what do those contracts say as far as canceling them? Do you have to pay out Is there a window where, let's say if the game isn't for 8 years from now, if you cancel it now, is there still that huge payout? Or, I don't know. I don't know what those contracts look like.
Yeah, and they might be all different, for different games, different runways, windows of time. But you think about the guarantees that you pay out for those games, right? Normally gets talked about if a team loses. Well, you paid such and such to come to your place
$500,000 to come beat you.
Yeah, $500,000, $750,000. I mean, they get up there, right? And so, depending on the contract, they can be pretty punitive. And so, if you're balancing, okay, yeah, we're getting an additional. I guess the way you would think about it is, hey, if we're getting an extra $5 million to do that, that's just an estimate. Where did these estimates come from?
Sure.
Maybe the SEC came up with it as a kind of a public bargaining chip. I think that's the part that's getting lost in all this is what's one way that you can kind of bargain on these things. If you're ESPN, if you're the SEC, you can kind of use the media to push some of these pieces. You could even use some of your league's coaches maybe to push some of these pieces if you want.
Well, the funniest thing of all this is we're still not guaranteed to get an answer this week at the SEC meetings. They don't have to. There's no specific deadline to make this decision. We're hoping they're going to figure things out this week, but we may still be having the same conversation a week from now.
Yeah, we could be. By the way, y'all, before we get out of here, I wanted to leave y'all with something a little bit different, get y'all's quick reaction. Back to baseball real quick. So y'all have heard me mention on the show before this guy Parker. He's Stats Awar on Twitter.
Yep.
Has a very, very good follow. Give him a follow at Stats Awar. A lot of times he does football models, but he actually has a college baseball model. I don't know if y'all saw this, but he does sim games basically. After 10,000 simulations, probability of making the College World Series, not winning it, making it. South Carolina, according to his sim, has a 29.5% chance to make it. That is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is 7th best in the country. And apparently, I saw Will Helms tweeted this. His model even takes into account what have you done for me lately. So it weights some of the more recent results as well. If you're the Gamecocks, if you're the Gamecock fan base, and I told you right now you got a 30% chance to go to Omaha, you are taking that all the way. And interestingly enough, Florida, who, of course, South Carolina is paired with, at 35.1%. So a little bit more than South Carolina. But essentially, you add those two together, that tells me that even with as much chaos as generally happens in baseball, especially baseball postseason, at least this model very much thinks that South Carolina and Florida will exit their regional, and essentially they're opposing each other. Like South Carolina in this model is what is keeping Florida from having a much higher percentage. And in this model, Florida is what is keeping South Carolina from having a higher percentage. And as far as the regional difficulty, South Carolina's regional right in the middle.
Fascinating.
Interesting. We'll let y'all chew on that for 24 hours. Be back for tomorrow's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with Jay and Terry coming up next on 107.5 The Game.
Does an orthopedic condition or sports injury have you sidelined? Make your comeback with GW Hospital Sports Medicine. We offer services from neck to toe, including care for shoulders, hips, knees, ankles, and hands. Plus, we're the official healthcare partner of GW Athletics, the DC Furies, and the DC Revolution. Get back to doing the things you love. Learn more at gwhospital.com/sportsmed or call 888-4GW-DOCS. Physicians are not employees or agents of this hospital.